My name is Alex. I'm Android developer. Currently, I'm working at Backbase, and today I will talk about navigation in Jetpack Compose. So, during this talk, I want to concentrate on navigation in general, how navigation was changing in Android history, which approaches we can use for navigation because we have multiple solutions during the time. And later on, we will speak a bit about Jetpack Compose, and we will speak, of course, about navigation. So I want to mention that at the end, I will show the live demo of the project. And during this presentation, and on this slide, you can find information not ideal from the very beginning, but I will show how to start with something simple and improve it step by step. So if you found something really simple at the beginning, it doesn't matter that at the end it also will be done in this way. So let me start with Android history. Starting from our first Android release in 2008, we have intent was introduced. So intent allows us to do activity-based navigation. So we can interact between different activities with intent inside our application or outside of our application. Later on, Fragment was introduced in Android 3.0. And together with Fragment, we got Fragment Manager. So it was pretty interesting time because starting from this moment, we had a situation when people start thinking which approach to use. And at the end, we had a lot of projects which use only activities, another project which use one activity and multiple fragment, third type of project when you can find multiple activities and multiple fragments. At that time, fragments also had some issues, and later on was fixed. But it was pretty interesting and a bit strange time because everything was implemented a bit differently. And the last official solution, which was introduced around 2 years ago, it was Jetpack navigation. Jetpack navigation based on fragments. And in addition to it, we have a bit simpler navigation. We had a bit simpler animations, and we can see our navigation graph, which simplify a lot and also help to understand scale of the application. And of course, with Jetpack navigation at the beginning, mostly based on fragments, and usually from this time, people in projects started to use one activity and multiple fragments. So, speaking about different navigation use case, fortunately, we don't have too much of them. Mostly, it's just 2 of them. It's screen-to-screen navigation. And great example here, it's master detail flow. So when we have list of item and we click on the item and we completely move to another screen. Or alternative approach is when we click on the screen and part of the screen will be updated. Also, this approach is used for, as example, bottom navigation. When we have some view rendered in container, it can be fragment or different view. It's not a big difference from navigation perspective. But very often in our application, both of these approaches also used. And as a fun thing, that previous example, let's imagine that we have master detail flow, and when we click on our bookmark or favorite icon on detail screen, part of the screen also will be updated. So the fun story about it is that it can be completely implemented with activities if we don't really care about tablet version when we want to see a list of items plus detail screen at the same time. Otherwise, we can use activities, only activities. From other side, we can have one activity and multiple fragments and implement the same thing also. And one more version is we can have multiple activities and multiple fragments. And in addition to it, right now we have composable functions, which also can be mixed with both of these approaches, because activity still is entry point to our application. So as you can see, we can use multiple different approaches, or we can think how to combine them, and I will share a bit more about it in the next section. So speaking about navigation, I really want to speak about real-world examples, because yes, ideally we can start and rewrite application, but it's not in reality. So it means that we have different approaches. But before speaking about them, let's speak very shortly about what is Compose, why it was introduced, and which benefits we can have. I try to make it pretty short, just to provide some basic information for people who are not really familiar with concept of Compose. So Compose is declarative UI, which allow us to build user interface with Kotlin and use all Kotlin features like if, else, for each, filters, etc., etc. So in this here, you can see a simple counter application, where we can increment our counter value or decrement. So layout code of Jetpack Compose is a bit simplified here, just not to concentrate on styling. And as you can see, one of really important thing for us, which is like one of core concepts of Jetpack Compose, is state. So situation with Compose is following. When state of our function or state of our application is changed, screen will be recomposed. So we don't need to do manually change visibility, set value in every specific test case. Main idea is that we pass our state into composable function or create state inside composable functions. And later on, when we change the state, our functions or whole screen can be recomposed and user interface will be updated. And here we have, we cannot just create a simple variable and change value of this variable. We need to provide additional information to the Compose framework, and we can do it with remember function, because remember function allows to add information about this object together with information about this object to the slot table, where also store information about user interface. And when framework sees that state of this function was changed, function will be recomposed. So here is another example how can we create multiple functions and build screen in pretty readable way. Because here we can see top up bar, which has only a basket title. Later on, we have payment information component, which rendered a delivery cost, total cost, and payment button. And at the end, we have product list. So from this perspective, it's very readable. You can dip directly into required function and change it. But when you see on code of the screen, it looks much simpler than we have right now. So about different approaches which we can use. As I told, our world is not ideal, and many great applications already created. And of course, we cannot just rewrite all existing application because it's pretty expensive, it's pretty time consuming, and it's not super interesting for business. So we have two approaches. One approach at how we should think how to add a Compose into existing application, or if we're lucky to start a new project and we want to use Compose in this project, we can also do it, but it will be two different cases. So let's at the beginning speak pretty shortly about existing application. So many current and modern applications use Jetpack navigation as one of latest solution for navigation. However, if you don't use it, it's also not a problem. And almost every application based on fragments. However, it's also based on activities. But if we want to start introducing Jetpack Compose to Thatch project, we can have few options. The first option is to create composable functions. And later on, together with a compatibility feature of Jetpack Compose, it can be added by Compose view to XML layout, and later on we can work with it as with traditional view. Or other approach, if we, as example, use fragments, we can create a fragment and set and add whole composable screen into these fragments. So from outside, we will just render fragments to our screen. But under the hood, everything on these fragments and on the following fragments can be also written in Compose. If we are lucky enough to start a new application, of course we can write everything in Compose except Android manifest, maybe some resources, and of course activity, because activity is still in entry point to our application. In this case, we can use Jetpack Compose navigation, which is based on Jetpack navigation, but is also use additional navigation provider, which allow us to move not only between fragments, but also between different composable functions. And whole application can be written fully in Compose if it's great for you. However, create multiple fragments and add composable screen to different fragments is also pretty good solution because it's really stable solution, because we work with our current version of fragment pretty long time and it's worked pretty well. So the really important thing when we try to speak about any type of navigation is to build navigation graph. So when we try to build a navigation graph, we can have nav host, and inside this nav host we can have multiple destinations or screens. So inside this nav host we can have container, and in this container we will render some data. So when we try to create a nav host object, we need to create a navigation controller. Later on we will talk about it, and we need to add start destination, because our destination should be matched to one of composable functions which we have inside. So what does it mean, this composable function inside navhost? And here I want to speak super briefly how Jetpack Compose navigation work inside. So if we take a look at navhost function, we can see that latest parameter, it's a navigation graph builder. So speaking about navigation graph builder, it means that we can use all functions from this builder, and one of such function is composable. So main idea of this function is to add a nav destination to the destination list. And when we added multiple composable functions which has navigation destination, at the end graph will be built. In pretty similar way, we can have also nested graphs, which will be inside our main graph. So very often we can have one or multiple nav hosts. I will show you why can we need multiple nav hosts in a demo, and we can have one or many navigation graph with different amount of destinations. So if we speak about navigation graph in Jetpack Compose, in a Jetpack navigation, not a Compose one, usually we have a navigation graph. And in a traditional approach, we have XML file with navigation graph, or we can have many of such files. And in addition to it, we have visual representation of such navigation graph. So with Jetpack Compose, we also can have graph, and we have coffee drink screen, and this screen can have two actions. It's navigate to detail screen and navigate to basket. And in addition, we have two more composable screens. However, we don't have a visual representation of the graph in Jetpack Compose. It's not available right now. Maybe in future it will be added, but it's something what does not exist yet. So here we also show how can we navigate, how can we open any navigation or start any navigation action. And here we need to use navigation controller and .navigate, and we can add route to our final destination. So let's speak a bit more about how navigate functions work inside. So first of all, because we have multiple navigate functions with different parameters, and this one is one of most used with Jetpack Compose. And here we have route and navigation option builder. So speaking about navigation options, we can have options like pop up to inclusive. So we can interact with backstack when we navigate. So let's speak how it's work inside. So when we call navigate function, inside this function, the first action which framework try to do is try to find a destination in the graph. Because here, if navigation found in a graph, we can just get object from the navigation graph. But if it's not possible to find enough destinations, we need to create a new one. Later on, framework analyze our navigation options, and if options required modification of backstack, it will be done. When modification of backstack is done, if it was needed, after it, new or existing nav backstack entry will be added to the top of the backstack. And finally, we update backstack lifecycle. So the previous screen, if it still exists in navigation graph, in backstack, sorry, it will be change a state from resume to created, and the newly added nav backstack entry will change his state to resumed, and in this moment navigation happened. So it was happened inside nav controller when we execute navigate action. So, and right now one of the most important part is of course routine. So let me show my my application. Let me show application which I have, and explain why can we need multiple nav hosts. So I hope you see my screen. So let me start an application. So here its application is semi-working, not working, because it shows what it should show, but some part is just hard-coded and it's not working. but it's allow us to analyze and think what we can do with navigation. So when we have coffee drink screen, here we can change state of our screen by adding or removing some edited coffee from our local runtime repository. So the next step, when we move to the basket, we can move to the pay button. Click to the pay button, and new screen will be opened. And if we click done, everything will be clear. We have one more tab, which has hard-coded data. So what is pretty important to understand is that when we start our navigation from our coffee drink screen, we placed inside bottom navigation container. So let me try to show you it with layout inspector. Great, layout inspector is working. So we had a scaffold layout inside. Oops, maybe not working. Let me try to rerun it. So when we click on any of our coffee, yes, it's working again. So, and here when we have, okay, not today, no problem. So let me run one more time. So when we click on any drink, new screen will be open. And as you can see, we still have bottom navigation, because when we open any navigation item from our home screen, which has bottom navigation, we can all composable functions will be rendered inside container between top of the screen and top of bottom navigation. So here we can see all changes, but sometimes we need to go outside of this navigation graph and open other function inside of it. And when we click pay, we open on top of our navigation. That's why when we open our main activity, here we have one navigation host, which allows us to render composable function for the full screen. But when we open home screen, inside the home screen, we have another nav host, which can be rendered on the top of bottom navigation. So let's come back to presentation, and I want to share a bit more information before next part of a demo. Okay, that's interesting. So I try to fix it. Okay, yeah, so it's working. So coming back to the routing. So speaking about routing, first of all, we need to create our nav host. When we need to add our composable functions, which has route from one side, and which screen connected with this route or inside our Lambda function. In this way, we build navigation graph, and when navigation graph is built, we can later on start navigating with navigate functions when we pass only our route. But it's not always working for us because very often we want to have more complex navigation. So speaking about more complex navigation, we want to pass parameters inside our function. And the first way is to build our route more castable and in curly braces, name of our parameter. So when we use navcontroller.navigate, we can already pass our route with a value for our parameters. And inside navigation graph composable function, we can get this value from lambda of composable.argument.any type which we want and name of our variable. And in this case, we can customize entry point of our composable function. So this approach is a bit problematic because name of route we should write multiple times. And of course, it's pretty easy to make a typo here. So as a thing which we want to achieve is to introduce one small abstractions, which already can simplify it. So if we take a look at our screen abstraction, inside this abstraction, we can add our route for every specific screen. And in case when any screen required additional parameters, inside this object, we can add a function create route, and where we can pass any amount of parameters. And later on, final route with all required parameters will be generated for us. So at the end, when we use navcontroller.navigate, we can use screen.any specific screen.create route with any value. It's much simpler, it's much harder to make a typo here. And all other part work in the same. And here in this example, instead of inside composable function, instead of route, instead of long string route, we can use just screens dot coffee drink details. It will be completely the same. And very often we want to send typed parameters to also have additional navigations, additional verification of a parameter type before navigation. So for it, in addition to route, we can have arguments, and these arguments we can provide list of argument with key and specific type, and value can be mapped. So all other part is the same. We can pass all primitive types plus resource references, parcelable, serializable, and enums. But right now we have some problems with parcelable. So I wouldn't show, because on the internet, it's easy to find some hacks, which some of them worked previously, right now they are not working. Some other ones even work right now, but I don't want to show hacks, and I hope pretty soon it will be fixed. Speaking about deep links, it's also possible to provide a way of doing deep linking. And the first step is pretty similar as we have without Jetpack Compose, is to update our Android manifest of our activity. And here we need to provide action and categories, and also data, which is needed for deep linking. And speaking about Compose, we can do it in any nav host, because previously I showed that in my application I have multiple of them on different layers. And here we need to add deep links parameter to composable function. And here we need to configure it for any specific route. So here I want to also switch come back to our demo. So let me, as you can see inside main activity, when we have root navhost, we don't have any deep links. But if we move to home screen, here we have one more, here we have additional screens. And here we have one of composable roots with deep links. So the simplest way for us to verify it is to use terminal. So let me hide it for a second. So let me open Android manifest. So here we use host as example.com. So when we want to start any intent, first of all, we need to pass our URL. After URL, we need to pass root, which is defined for a specific screen. So here, if we check coffee drink details, root of it is coffee drink details, and later on the name of parameter coffee drink ID. So let's come back to the terminal, and here we also have after host we have root of our screen and specific ID. So let me show emulator again. So when we executed this command, we can see on emulator that action was triggered, and when we open our this action via our application, we can see that coffee drink with ID 3 was opened, and it was open inside child navhost. So it doesn't matter how many navhosts you have. If they are connected with the same activity, it can be opened without any issue. Let's come back to the presentation. So for if we want to integrate deep linking, first of all, we need to add deep links parameter to our navigation graph composable function and define a root with URI. And URI is needed because it's host which we added to Android manifest. And later on, we need to parse data and create screen with required parameters. So we also can interact and open any application like Google Maps. And in this example, I create an intent which tried to start Google Maps with a specific geoposition for Amsterdam. So inside our functions, to start any activity, first of all, we need to get a context, and for it we can use local context.current. When we got this context, we can start our activity. And the really important thing is that if you want to use get a current context, you should do it inside composable function. But if you take a look inside onClick function, in-click function is not composable. So you should do it inside the body of your function, but outside of onClick. And later on, you can use it, of course, inside onClick function. And navigation options are pretty important because they can create some problems or simplified how your application behave with backstack. So when we use just navigate options, when we start screen A will be added to the backstack. When we navigate to screen B also will be added. The same from B to C, and from C to A, it also will be added. So if you want to close application, you should press back 4 times. And of course, for us, it's not great. When we use pop up to, when we first of all use navigate 3 times, and we have A, B, and C. in our navigation graph, and later on we use navigate with pop-up, and here inclusive parameter will be false. We remove C and B. Screen A we have in a backstack, and later on we add one more A. Other approach is when we use inclusive. Screen A, first of all, also will be removed from the backstack, and a new instance will be added. So the thing which is pretty important to understand with Jetpack Compose is how different containers influence on our navigation. So we can have pretty similar application when we have screen plus button navigation, and we can have nav host, as in my application, on different layers. One of on-screen layer, and it allows us to move from screen to screen, and it will be completely full screen, not inside of button navigation, but completely full screen. And if we have nav host inside our screen when we have button navigation, and we have limited container of limited sites, and inside this container we will try to create nav host. Only inside this container we can have this navigation. So it can be a bit tricky, and you should understand where you want to place your nav host. And when you want to, as in my application, from main activity, I have my root nav host, which can replace completely full screen. And if I want to open full screen from child graph, which can do navigation only in small container, we can provide a simple router interface with navigate to functions, which provide only root, and simple functions we just beautified a bit. So here inside our nav host to our screen, we can pass this router, and when from our screen will be passed any value to the main activity, and this root nav controller will execute it, and it helps us to navigate and replace full screen with another screen, as I have it with basket payment screen. And I'll come back to demo and show a bit more details about it. However, when we think about doing some preview, we can find a problem. We can find some problems because we need to pass nav host inside our screen. To avoid such situation and to have possibility to pretty easy create composable function with some navigation, we can move all our navigation actions inside our constructor. And here we have navigate to coffee drink details. So, and when we create inside main activity, we need to do all such type of navigations. And in this case, we can control all type of our navigation inside nav host class. So in this case, we have something pretty similar what we had with Jetpack Compose without a Jetpack navigation, not Compose one, when we have a navigation graph with all actions to different screens. And it also helped to simpler create preview annotations, because in this way you don't need to create always nav controller. And here you can just put empty lambda or any other type of navigation, which is not important when we test a user interface of our screen. So this is all about my presentation, and I want to come back to the demo. And if we have any questions in the chat, I will be happy to answer. And meantime, I will show a bit more of this demo. So the first thing which can be tricky is different. It's different nav hosts. So in our main activity, inside our navigation graph, we have access to home screen and success screen. So this is a home screen which has a couple more screens inside button navigation, inside scaffold layout. And when we move to when we click pay, we open our success screen, and as you can see, it's open on top of button navigation. But if you right now if we check our home screen nav host, here we have coffee drinks. You can see right now the screen, and you can also and we open any drink, we have navigation action here. So if we go inside this container, only this part will be updated. And if we try to use this nav controller, we can never we can never execute and see on the screen full screen, completely full screen, because we have this container. And I try to show it again with layout inspector, because it's we can see it easily with layout inspector. Let me try to do it fast. So here we have, yes, as you can see, our column layout is here. It's not it's on the top of bottom navigation. So any actions which we try to execute, they are rendered inside this container. So if we want to do it outside, we need to provide a different nav controller, which we have on different layer. So maybe we have some questions.
Yes. Let me fix something.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if I can mute myself. Okay, so I think test. Yes, perfect. Okay, hi everyone. I'm jumping in because, as you noticed, we had some technical difficulties in the beginning. So we're improvising. I'm here now instead of Yolanda. And as I just let me check if you can hear me well. I think you can hear me. So we skipped over the intro talk, and we let you know the standard like intro talk from us. And there are some questions in the chat. So let's just directly jump to the Q&A. And then later I will add some more information about our perspective on in-person meetups and how we see that in the future. But first, back to the questions. There were actually, if anyone has any question so far, I see a couple already from Sebas, Maarten in the chat. If there are more, you can put them there. In the meantime, I have one question for you, Alex. Thanks for the talk, by the way, really great. Also super interesting talk. I have to be honest, like I'm going to watch it back better because like I'm busy with the stream, so you don't like fully have my focus, but also compliments on the slides. They look really great. Nice animations, of course. But you've been a speaker before on our meetup, actually a couple of times, and one time before also about Jetpack Compose. It's more than a year ago already, and that's where you did an intro on Jetpack Compose.
Yes.
And my question is actually, how would you say the library has developed in the past year?
It's, I think, yes, of course, right now it's much simpler to work with a library because it's not changes too often. But I'm not a person who is. I see many people who is super excited about Jetpack Compose will be released. I'm not such type of person. First of all, most probably the main reason that I'm working as Android developer too long to expect that something high quality and super stable will be delivered fast. And a really great demo or example of it. By the way, I shared later on slides on the Slack channel and on my Twitter, and link to this project also together with slides. So if we take a look to build Gradle file, here I see, yes, let me find Jetpack Compose. Compose release candidate 1. And the only one thing, let me try to open any screen. Oh yeah, probably here I have some. Yes, so I have latest version, and here you can see that all layout is built great. But the main reason why it's working for me personally is only because of this additional customization when I use alt tooling from Jetpack Compose. So I'm happy about the library. I really like the way how it's working, but I still think that it's too fast to release it. And when I use latest version, instead of preview, it shows something like this.
Oh.
So it's no preview, and preview not working. So I like approach how it's used, but I'm still think that it's a bit too early, especially using it production, because sometimes, and from my perspective, such thing shouldn't happen when it's release candidate. If it's alpha beta, that's completely fine. But yeah, this is my 5 cents about using Jetpack Compose in production. So you can still find some issues, even if you use release candidate build and all the stuff. But from my perspective, I cannot compare it with any web frameworks, which also had declarative UI. I can compare it with Swift UI. I know it a bit, and from my perspective, Jetpack Compose is much readable than Swift UI. And from this readability, from my perspective, it's a really important thing, because majority of time we just read some code, we not write. So, and especially if you try to create small components, you can create your layout. Your layout's pretty simple. And a lot of stuff was polished. Compose working much faster. And I would say that right now, after a year, more or less a year from my previous presentation, it's much simpler than it was a year before. So it's much simpler to use.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've already been using Jetpack Compose since alpha, so you are also used to changing probably your presentations last minute because a new version came out, and also breaking projects. So like using Jetpack Compose, there's just a lot of hiccups. But do you you expect it to be better with the stable release, or?
Yeah, I think it will be stable. And to be honest, during working last time, starting from beta, I didn't have like super important issues which didn't allow me to work with something. Of course, I had it before presentation, as it was before last presentation. One was before presentation, API was deprecated, and last minute I updated my slides. But right now, no issues at all if we skip this issue with preview. So for me, it works pretty well.
Yeah. Let's go over to some questions from the chat. There was one question from Sebas there with some introduction. Let me read it. In the root navigation host, I saw home and success payment screen as composable destinations and home as a default destination. The question is, if I open the app called Start with a deep link to the success payment composable destination, will the default destination home also be added to the backstack? It's maybe a long one. I hope you can follow. Maybe you have the chat open. So if I open the app called Start with a deep link to the success payment composable destination, so if you open the app called Start with a deep link to the success payment screen, will the default destination also be added to the backstack?
So I propose just to check it to have proper answer. Mm-hmm. So we have our screen, and yes, it was added before because it's our because our activity should be created, and when we create our activity, the first thing what has happened, and it's this nav host created, and only when this nav host created, only after it this route also will be created. So that's why, of course, first screen always will be added to the backstack.
Okay, that's pretty clear. I hope that answers your question, Sebas. Otherwise, you can let me know in the chat. Martin asks, did you pick up any tips on unit or UI testing this kind of navigation?
So I really like UI testing topic.
You've had a talk about testing also before in our meeting.
Yeah. The main reason it really depends what you want to test. So if you use approach, so let me check. Yes, with coffee drink screen, you can see that we pass our direction inside as a parameter. So if you want to do this action, you should configure your behavior of it, and it's one type of test. What is really great about this approach when you pass any type of navigation, because you can super easily customize it to any custom empty screen to not spend time for rendering and just speed up your test. So this approach will be really great, because if it will be handled inside, you cannot really customize it at all. But other type of test is end-to-end test, and if you really want to, from my perspective, end-to-end test should be always included into testing strategy. And if you think about end-to-end test, you don't care how it's implemented. You just test all flows of your application. So this type of navigation doesn't influence any end-to-end test, but provide additional possibility if you want to test screen in isolation with navigation to other screen.
Okay. Would that technically also mean that if you migrate one screen implemented with XML and you have like a UI test for that, and then migrated to Compose that you would expect this test to still pass afterwards, or do you need to overhaul the test for that?
We have multiple approaches. So the first approach is when we have fragment-based application, and inside the fragment we have just I have some time ago I wrote other application which is actually based on fragments. So it's just a fragment-based application. I hope it will be a bit faster. Yeah, and if you find this application, you can see here like old navigation graph in XML and all this stuff. And when you open any screens, yeah. So if you open screen, so yeah, a lot of yeah. So inside the screen, it's simple fragment, and inside this fragment we return compose view, and here we create set content and render all our code. So for here we don't think that it can be a problem. The only problem possible is that I know that some time ago, I didn't check it recently, to be honest, but some time ago, Espresso cannot interact with composable views. Because during the time of my first presentation, if you open a layout inspector, you can see fragment, and inside fragments, you can see view group, composable view, and inside it, everything was handled. At that time, Espresso cannot handle it. For Espresso, just one view and that's all. But right now, with layout inspector was fixed, and I can imagine that if it's fixed for Espresso and Espresso can find any type of view, it wouldn't be a problem. If Espresso still cannot find it, yeah, after it, test will stop working. But you have additional library for UI testing of composable code. So yeah, maybe this part is needed to change, but I'm not sure.
Okay. I mean, I think when a lot of people will eventually migrate to Compose, we will all get to this point eventually. I want to go to the next question from Menno. Let me double check if I don't miss anything. No. Question, let's say you have to load extra information on the Espresso detail screen. How do you manage those dependencies when only working with composables?
So let's move to this screen. So we have here. So let's start from home screen. So inside the home screen, we have our root, which includes our coffee drink ID, and we know that we need to pass any data here. Later on, when we have our coffee drink detail screen, as one of parameters, it's our ID as parameter of our composable function. So inside navgraph composable function, we pass arguments and pass them to our screen. So in this case, we have pretty pure call of our function because here everything passed as an argument. So we don't have any hidden logic because it wasn't so obvious as example for fragments or for activities, because we should get an intent, get some data from the intent and all this stuff. Here we all data get from our parameters. So it's much simpler and much cleaner. And later on, yeah, it's super simplified version. But here we should speak with our view model if you use MVVM as example. And later on, MVVM speak with repository. Here I have just simple functions which find instance of dummy object based on ID. But if you add view model, repository, you cache some data, it will work in similar way. A bit more complex, but similarly.
Okay, that's a pretty clear answer, actually.
I think it's completely the same as we do right now, but from my perspective, a bit simpler because we got all data as parameters of our function.
Yeah. Then I think the last question from Ahmad is, you mentioned that parcel types still have issues with navigation arguments. So how would we pass objects that are already parceled in an existing project?
So right now it's a problem. Issue is created in Google Tracker. Yesterday I checked this issue already assigned to some person. So I hope pretty soon it will be fixed. And that's additional reason why I think it's too early to migrate to Compose, because yeah, it's from my perspective, speaking about navigation, sending parcelable object, it's pretty obvious. It's not something super hidden case which almost never happened. It's happened too often in in real world application. So from my perspective, yeah, because solutions which I saw, they were super strange for me, but some of them previously working, right now not working, some of them still work. So main idea of this solution is that people added parcelable object to the current screen. In the next screen, get access to the backstack, get access to the previous screen, and try to get this data from the previous screen. So I don't want to show such approach in presentation because maybe someone will watch this presentation in few months and it will be super strange.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's working for some people, but I think it should be properly fixed. And one more thing also about why we have such type of issues. If we come back to our, we have navigation compose, we can see 2.4.0 alpha 04. So I expect such issues from alpha version of the library, but it's also additional reason not to think twice before migrating or starting right now if you need to release any feature pretty soon or even application. Just right now start to work with Compose completely.
And about some things missing or not working in Compose, there were more things like not only the parsable, but some previous things you mentioned. But do you know if they're already on a bug tracker, if they're maybe already announced to be fixed in the next version?
So many issues they are already on the bug tracker, and people pretty often report such issues. And what is really great, it's official Kotlin Slack channel. It's official Jetpack Compose Slack group in Kotlin Lang Slack, and people from Google, especially who develop Compose, also in this channel. So it's really great to ask such questions, and they also react on it, and they also answer this question and create also tickets for, and will work on them in future.
Okay, that's good to know. So let's hope for the best for the next version. There are no new questions. last question for me is like you can't use Compose now in production anymore, but or not yet, sorry. For what would you recommend using Compose? Is it still fun to use in side projects or to learn?
Yeah, it's for sure will be used very often. I personally big fan of approach, and I really believe in Kotlin multi-platform plus Swift UI plus Jetpack Compose plus Compose desktop if it's needed. Because if you think, what is really great about Jetpack Compose is that it's really like a UI layer of your application. It's not about building a full application on Compose. So I recommend right now, especially for production, just use Compose for if you want to use it in production. Use it for simple thing. Create a more complex view in Compose and add it to the fragment or add it to your XML. But maybe build whole features with navigation inside and with pretty complex stuff. Yeah, it can be a problem. From my perspective, it should be we should do it smart, as some time ago people did with Kotlin, when they first of all tried to apply Kotlin in unit test, learn a bit, and only after it start apply it to production. So from my perspective, if it's something simple, you can always play and use it, because after some time, many people for sure will use it. And the truth about Android development is that, from my perspective, it's very hyped development. I remember some time ago when everyone switched from any approach to the RxJava. Later on, everyone switched from RxJava to live data. However, RxJava and observables is much powerful concepts than live data. Later on, everyone switched to coroutines, and in the same way, people switched to Jetpack Compose.
Yeah. Yeah, true story. I think a lot of people watching either did the same route or can speak about that. Okay. Before we stop, maybe you can also show the last sheet of your presentation, because I think there's more information about where people can find you, and that's also the place where you will be posting your slides. And is there also are your code samples also publicly available?
Yes, it's publicly available. I share it on everywhere, and I also plan to share article or series of article about navigation at my blog starting from next week. So it also will be available in text format if you prefer such way of content. And yeah, in LinkedIn, in Twitter, and in Slack, I shared slides and link to source code.
Okay. That's amazing. Thanks for the presentation. Great to have you again on our live stream. I think the third time during the lockdown, and maybe see you next time.
Yeah.
And for everyone else, before we stop, we've been asked a couple of times what we are going to do with the in-person meetups. A lot of people miss them, of course. For now, we still keep everything online. Because we're not going we're not comfortable yet organizing things on a location, and we just wait until like things settle down a lot more than now. But we will definitely update the community in Slack, Twitter, etc. when we decide otherwise. Thanks for watching, and yeah, see you next time.